Hey, Rob,
Okay.
love. It's so good to have you on the show, man. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. I want to congratulate you on your podcast. I've been listening to it for a bunch now. It always is a mind spin when I hear someone's voice so often and watch them on a podcast, and then kind of get to meet them, albeit virtually. So yeah, it's awesome. It's such a good moment. So I appreciate you, Ben.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. It has been a trip for me too that I have all of these, I call them long distance friends, people that know me a lot better than I know them because they've listened to the show and so they know, I don't know how I think, I guess. And they
Yeah,
meet me and they know all these things about me and I'm like, "Oh, nice to meet you." But so, yeah,
yeah.
it's cool.
It's just such a wild thing, but like with the internet these days, I never would have imagined in my lifetime that would be a almost a I guess it could be a social engineering to a degree, but you definitely develop a relationship of sorts with
Yes.
someone or a connection with someone, and
Yes.
things about you, which, like I said, you don't know me from Peter and Paul, right? But I know kind of like your character, and I know about your life and lifestyle. I appreciate some of your values and some of your viewpoints and things like that,
Yeah.
and then that connection with me resonates on certain levels, or we have a connection in terms of things that resonate with me on a core value level. So I get
Yeah.
like it's like a like-mindedness of, like you said,
Yeah.
like a long distance friend.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I actually just returned home yesterday from leading our first men's retreat in Mexico.
Yeah,
And
or
so a lot of the guys that we had 16 people total, I think. And so well, all the guys really came to the retreat through the podcast. So they're all fans of the show.
mhm.
And it was exactly that. Like all of those guys hold values and lifestyles and attitudes towards the world, I guess you would say, that are very similar to me. So like we got along very, very well, obviously, because well, they like the show and like what I stand for. So they're it's kind of a birds of a feather thing.
It is, yeah, for sure.
But I didn't realize how strong that is because prior to doing that retreat, I'd only met people at conferences and events sort of in passing. I don't spend a lot of time with them and really get to know them.
Mm.
But these guys, we did some hardcore shit together, really got to know each other. So it was cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that it's almost like a part of human connection is to want to be connected to others and to want to be seen in a similar light, or things
Mhm.
like that. So it's that whole sort of your vibe attracts your tribe type of thing,
Yes.
where like I'd imagine the energy in that retreat would have been phenomenal because
Oh,
everyone's kind
yeah.
of already vibing at the same level.
Yes. It was amazing. And that to cap it off, I'm a bit of a lone wolf type guy. Like I'm introverted and I just always kind of have gone my own path. All these guys were similar, right? They're all kind of lone wolf types. They run their own. Most of them weren't in the corporate world. Most of them run their own businesses. They're entrepreneurial, they're independent thinkers, they're disagreeable. And so not guys that you would typically get in one unified whole, but because we were all that way, it just sort of gelled.
Mm.
And I it just it worked out beyond my wildest dreams of how good it was. I was kind of a little nervous about it because like, what do I know about leading a retreat? And you're kind of doubting yourself, like, what do I really have to offer these guys? And I'm 38. We had age ranges from 22 to 72.
Yep.
And so,
Wow.
especially for the guys that are older than me, I'm like, what do I have to offer these guys? But it just, man, it flowed so well. And we got very fortunate with the retreat center that we booked. They just do an excellent job programming. They sequence it properly. So, like, you're going through some adversity together, then you're like doing some scientific exploration about how the nervous system works, and you're doing some spiritual practices. And it was
Mm.
so good, man. So good.
I'm so happy for you, man. I think that's an incredible thing. Can I ask you, like, for people that don't know you, that watch my show, like you've got a podcast that's called What Is Money? If from an outside perspective, everyone would say you're a money guy, you're a Bitcoin promoter as such, or this is something that you are heavily interested in at least. So why then run a men's retreat? Like, what's the parallel between what you do for a living, so to speak, and then a men's retreat? It seems like they're almost like polar opposite.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So I started the podcast November 2020, and that was really a big moment for me to kind of break out of my shell as an introvert. I had done some writing previously. I'd been going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole since like 2016, and I really just started reading a lot about Bitcoin, then tweeting about Bitcoin, then writing some essays about it. Then I was invited on people's podcasts to talk about the things I had written. Some of those episodes became popular, and then eventually I just decided I should jump on this podcast bandwagon. And that has been great. That journey's been phenomenal. Like, I've learned a lot. I've talked with some of the smartest people in the world. It's given me a lot of cognitive liberty, right? Like, I can just kind of read whatever I want, go whatever direction I want. And then when I'm interested in a particular branch of a particular rabbit hole, which more or less all connects to the Bitcoin rabbit hole somehow,
Mhm.
I can, have the author come on the show or have someone else that's an expert in his work or that domain. And so it's given me this like ability to just let my curiosity run wild. And it's been tremendous. But you get to this point with the philosophizing, right? Like, it's I look, I love thinking and talking and dialoguing. Like, I do this for a living. So I'm not trying to downplay it or disrespect it at all, but you do hit this wall or threshold where it's like, okay, enough talk.
Mhm.
It's like Bitcoin is this instrument that gives you tremendous economic freedom. It also gives you tremendous agency, autonomy, cognitive freedom, whatever you want to call it. The metaphor we often invoke is it's like the unplug moment from the Matrix. Because once you realize that the money is a scam and you start to see how everything else connected to the money is a scam, and your whole worldview, it just like dissolves or shatters, and then you are in this new space, kind of like picking up the pieces, reconstructing yourself and your identity, your trajectory in life. And so at some point in the Bitcoin philosophizing journey, and I guess a lot of this would be attributable to studying people like Mises, who wrote the book Human Action, right? He invented the term praxeology, which is the study of human action. It is the essence of true economics. And you realize this this epiphany moment, I guess, that words are limited. They're useful. It's an extremely useful tool. Obviously, we're using it all the time when we're speaking, when we're thinking, when we're writing. However, they're not what defines you. It's ultimately your actions that define you. And so when you gain this great economic, personal, cognitive liberty through Bitcoin, you do this for enough years, you eventually reach this point where you're like, okay, but what am I going to do with all of this? It's like, now I'm free, right? I don't have to work the job. I don't have to live in the place. I don't have to, you know, listen to the news or whatever the thing is, whatever the groove, the well-worn grooves that most people flow down. All of a sudden you're kind of standing above it, or, orthogonal to it. And you're like, I see the bigger picture now. I can do whatever I want. And then the question becomes naturally, is like, well, what are you going to do? You see this big bad world, this world that's sick in many ways. Like, I think fiat currency could be metaphorized as like a global economic blood disease, and every institution that lifeblood flows through, which is money, also becomes similarly diseased. And so you like wake up in this, what is the reality called when they wake up from the Matrix? Zion, is that what they call it? I
Something
guess
like
you
that.
wake up
Yeah.
in Zion, right? And you see all the machines and you see all the humans being used as batteries, which are the taxpayers basically. And you're like, what am I going to do about all this?
Mm.
And so this is like where I'm at on the Bitcoin journey, and the mantra or the battle cry that we're currently trumpeting is, the acronym for Bitcoin is BTC. And so what I think you ultimately have to do with all this philosophizing is you have to embody it. It has to be in the flesh. It's actually what the word incarnate means. Like you heard carne, like carne asada, like steak, right? Meat. It's
Mm.
in the meat, in the flesh. You have to incarnate the philosophy that you wish to see in the world. And so for BTC, that's be the change you wish to see in the world. And so that's what we're trying to do. That's what spurred and motivated this whole idea of a men's retreat. Um, Trying to lean into like divine masculinity,
Mm.
and it goes into a lot of domains. Like we go into kind of the Carl Jung framework of king, warrior, magician, lover. We go into a lot of yogic practices. We're getting into Christ consciousness, all of these kind of ancient ways of being a good, responsible, strong man, which I think our times desperately need, right? We're in that phase of the
100%.
cycle where weak men create hard times. So we're trying to be the strong men that can usher in good times once again.
Yeah, I love that. I think like everything that you spoke to is really being congruent with the things that you say and embodying how the things you think and the things you do, and
Yes.
aligning all of that with how you conduct yourself through life. I think you're exactly right. In this day and age, and particularly in the last, you could say, maybe 15 or even 20 years, like all we've had is broken promises. All we've had is people saying one thing and doing another,
Right.
retreating on their word, going back on their word, feeling like you're feeling very betrayed and very disrespected and very underplayed. And a lot of that has led people to, I guess, a division where when you do start to figure things out as you've done, and you start to create some autonomy and you start to create a break in the matrix, so to speak, like you're escaping from the so-called rat race and all that kind of stuff, then I get it. Like there's a part of you is like, well, I'm going to need some friends along the way
Yeah.
here, right?
Of
So
course. Of
it's
course.
going to
Of
be fucking
course.
boring
Yes.
by myself, like I really need to
Yes. Yeah.
pull some people through with me. So I love all of that. And I think that there is a certain undertone. I'm not sure if I'm in a bit of an echo chamber at the moment, because this is kind of my world. A lot of your speaking, a lot of your podcast and things like resonate with me to the degree that it's like it's a personal growth tool that you're displaying. It's a path and a journey. It's your character. It's the things that you want to embody, and that sort of masculine trait that you're bringing through. I think
Mm.
without using too many of those sort of new agey terms and things like that, it's really embodying the type of individual that you want to display to the world, and then
Yeah.
helping everyone else sort of level up to that same place.
Yes. Yes. No, it's wonderfly said, and it's highly aspirational. I don't want to try to present myself as someone that's like I'm very cautious of guruification, where someone
Yeah.
wants to like look to the individual as the guy that figured it all out or any of that. It's like I don't claim to have any of this figured out at all, but I do assiduously pursue it. Like I really try to level myself up, whether it's cognitively, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And a lot of that, as you said earlier, comes in, it's very simple, but very difficult to do actually. And it's the integration of word and deed, right? To actually consistently always strive to do what you say you are going to do, and don't do what you say you're not going to do, right?
Mhm.
To actually be a good integrated whole human. Um, which requires a willingness to call yourself on your own bullshit a lot, because we are deeply flawed. We all have these, personality traits, rough edges, whatever you want to call them. We have blind spots about ourselves. We have ego trips. We have mood swings. Like, we're just, I mean, to use the Christian terminology, we're fallen or sinful creatures, basically.
Mhm.
And not in any kind of morally judgmental way. I'm not trying to say it like that, but like the traditional, the ancient Greek term for sin, comes from that archery term, hamartia, which just means to miss the mark. And so if you count the times, you could just do this any day of your life. Just take one day and count the times that you missed the mark, right? Little things. You left your phone in the other room, right? You mistyped a letter. You called the wrong person. You left your keys in the car. You ordered this, but you meant to order that. Like these little tiny errors that we're making all the time. That's what I mean by missing the mark. It's like we're aiming creatures. We're always on some goal-oriented path, right? We've got objectives, we've got plans that we're constantly carrying out. We're using means to do it, but we're always like, there's the path, and then we're always deviating on and off the path, and we're always having to course correct.
Mm.
And that's where the humility really comes into play, because if you just think that, oh no, you're not that person, you're the one human in all of human history that doesn't make these micro or even macro errors all the time. Well, what's the old saying, that pride comes before the fall?
Yeah.
And so you have to be willing to, I mean, it's not fun even. Like, you have to dig into your own shit, call yourself on your own darkness, your own mistakes, all of those things, and you have to do it constantly. And then to your other point of, you can't just do it alone.
Mm.
I mean, they're called blind spots for a reason, right? You can't see your own blind spots. That's why they show up in relationships. That's why they show up in relations with other people, right? They can see things about you that you yourself cannot.
Mm.
And so every relationship functions as like a psychological or emotional mirror. And you need multiple mirrors around you, right? You need multiple vantage points on you. And you're similarly providing those vantage points on others, so that we can always calibrate and adjust ourselves and make sure that we're in proper relation with each other and with reality and with the truth. And so it's that, if we aspire to be excellent, well, we need other people around us that push us to excel, right? We need to, this is the whole point of sport and capitalism, and even sibling rivalry, right? Like, people, we need to push one another to excel, and we need to have those fires of competition that allow us to call each other out and get better, right? To strive towards excellence.
Yeah. I love it.
And I guess in the Bitcoin circles, the and this actually is a term that comes from Nietzsche, the sovereign individual.
Mhm.
Moving towards this world where it's not states. Today we call states sovereigns. We say that's a sovereign state or a sovereign nation state. Well, what sovereign means, it's a word that is etymologically related with the word reign, Reign, like when a king reigns over a kingdom. It's sovereign, basically sovereign. Um, it's also related to the word money, and there's another word I forgot, but we don't want state. It basically, sovereign means the ability and authority to act as one sees fit. And actually, the word authority is related to the word author. So it's the ability to self-author your own story, effectively. Today, we have charged the monopoly on violence, which we call the state, with sovereignty, right? We give it the power to author our collective stories. And that has just proven to be a dysfunctional world, right? We have repeated nonstop warfare. We have propaganda. We have the greatest atrocities and mass murders in human history, all attributable to the state or statism. And so Bitcoin is really about taking sovereignty away from the state and giving it to individuals, right? It's not perfect. It's not the only solution. There's other things that are necessary, like critical thinking and gun ownership and, certain types of training. And I would also throw in all the things we touched on previously, Christ consciousness, it's et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Um, but it is a major, probably, well, it is the most significant economic tool for taking sovereignty away from the state and giving it to the individual.
Mm.
And that is a much better world, because if you have individuals that are incentivized to deal with one another consensually, right? And this gets into, there's a kind of a deeper point here, but essentially, because Bitcoin is hard to steal, that it makes stealing and coercion less profitable. Therefore, it makes trading and cooperation more profitable. So, on balance, we would expect that a world running on Bitcoin would have less statism and other forms of organized crime and more interdependent, interconnected trading relationships, entrepreneurship, etc.
Mhm.
That world is much richer, much more peaceful, much more innovative. And so this is the vision. This is the bright orange vision for the future. It's the world of the sovereign individual. And there is a book by that title for those that are a little bit more interested for a deep dive on the economics of violence and how Bitcoin influences that. And yeah, by that title, it's titled The Sovereign Individual. It's written in 1997, predicted things like social media, predicted things like Bitcoin, and
Wow.
predicted the use of uh, pandemics by global governments when they started to lose control to reassert their authority. So,
No way.
very prescient book, and a great read. Not the most fun read in the world. It's pretty
Yeah, sure.
dense, but very insightful.
Yeah, I'll put that one on the list for sure. So when you talk about people becoming sovereign and you talk about the use of, say, for example, Bitcoin to as a conduit to move to that state, and when you talk about man becoming the author of his own story, I'm curious to know that when you have each individual seeking their own truth. And I guess, some of the things that I wrestle with in my mind is like, what is reality and what is the
Mm,
truth? What is my truth? And am I
mm,
skewed to the degree that maybe I'm
mm.
convincing myself that my way is the right way? So you're always
Mhm.
doing, like you said before, that self check-in. You're calling
Yeah.
yourself out on your bullshit. You've got friends that can help you level up to the degree to say, look, I think you are or not on the right track. But when you have a collective of people doing the same thing, do you think that that initially would breed chaos, or do you think that it would naturally find an order or a level of harmony that would be almost like counterintuitive to the fact that, or to the notion that everyone's just following their own truth or their own what their version of the truth is? You know what I mean?
Yeah, this gets I can tell you're a philosophical guy because you're getting right into this. It gets semantic very quickly, right? Like when you're really trying to figure things out, almost every deep conversation, I think, boils down to a conversation about language, right? And we're trying to
Yeah.
establish these points of agreement, right? When you invoke the word understand, do I understand what you mean by that, right? Like are we lining up on the actual definitions of words? Do we have consensus on them?
Hmm.
And a lot of argument in society is about that, right? Is trying to get consensus on specific and precise terminology. And so this one I actually have a bit of a bone to pick, I think, because this, and I don't mean to, I'm not criticizing you, but I would just like push back on the use of the phrase my truth, your truth, their truth, our truth. I think that's kind of bullshit, honestly. Like I don't think you can own the truth, right? There's a possessive intonation in that phrase, right? You're literally like well, my bottle, right? The
Yeah.
bottle that I own. There is no truth that I own. I don't, there's nothing, the truth, Musashi has this great phrase where he says something like, the truth is what it is, and you must bend to its will or live a lie. Right?
Mm,
There's no owning it. There's no like my truth and your truth, and let's connect our truths and see what truth we find. Like, I mean, I get the sentiment, like you're trying to be authentic to yourself. What do you really want? What are your true desires or your true intentions? Like, I'm not trying to just like throw it out, but I want to be careful when we talk about the singular capital T cosmic truth, right? The state of reality that is, regardless of any perspective taken on it. Um, that is, there are certain things that are just inarguable. I'll go to Mises again, right? The axiom of human action: man must act. I think this might be the only linguistic construct that is utterly indisputable and irrefutable.
mhm,
And I'll explain why. Because what he said, when he says man must act, when you expand the definition of that axiom, he's saying that man must purposefully use means to pursue ends. So again, we are these goal oriented actors, right? Action takers, if you will. We are constantly assessing the world for means to accomplish our goals, or to bring us closer to our goals. And it's something you can't not do, actually. And the sort of proof for the axiomatic nature of that phrase is, no matter what counter argument you try to make and say, no, 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 man does not have to act for reasons A, B, and C, you are actually using the means of words and argumentation to the end of trying to refute the axiom of action, thereby proving the axiom of action in demonstration, in action, despite what the contents of what you're saying. Like, so the demonstration speaks louder than the explication. And so this makes it like the truest thing we can say about ourselves is that we are these action taking or action oriented organisms, right? And we can't, the only exception to action, they would call it purposeful behavior. So the opposite of action would be non-purposeful behavior. So if the doctor taps your knee with a hammer and your leg kicks out, well, you didn't like pre-plan that, you didn't premeditate that. That was a reflex. So those are like the exceptions to action, but every conscious thing that we do, every time we point our mind at something and move towards it, by using means to pursue ends, we are basically engaging in action.
mm,
And so that is that's the truest thing I think we can possibly say.
mhm,
And nobody owns that, right? And so this, and the relationship to Bitcoin here is kind of interesting, because there's a lot of frames of reference you can use to evaluate Bitcoin. A lot of this comes out in the metaphors we use to describe it. You often hear things like Bitcoin is the internet of money, or you might hear things like Bitcoin is digital gold. Um, but ultimately, I think we're like, there's the old vignette of the six blind guys touching the elephant, but each guy is touching a different part of the elephant, so they're describing it differently, even though they're all touching the same animal, right? One guy's touching the trunk, and one guy's touching the leg, and one guy's touching the tail. I think we're kind of doing that with Bitcoin with language. Like, you can describe it with a lot of different metaphors, but it's this entirely new animal, basically.
mm,
And in the same way that the axiom of action is incontrovertible, meaning there's nothing you can say about it to make it go away or to make it not be true, right? It's almost like it's the point where language ends, if that makes sense, right?
Mhm.
And we know we have this in our common adages: actions speak louder than words. All right, we know it. We know actions are more defined. We said it earlier, right? They define who you are. I can sit here and tell you about myself all day. Oh, I like this, I like this, I like that. And maybe you'd listen to me, maybe you'd believe me, but you're going to believe more what I go and do, right? The patterns you see me engaging in, how you see me actually acting and carrying myself in the world. That's ultimately what any of us will believe about one another. It's the highest signal indication of who we really are.
Mm.
And with Bitcoin, just like the axiom of action is this incontrovertible, inarguable, irrefutable language construct. Like, I think it's maybe the one thing that there's other, Ayn Rand has other axioms. She has like existence exists and consciousness is conscious, these other things. But even those I think are just linguistic, right? You're just saying like A equals A, basically.
Mhm.
But man must act is different, right? It's you're actually describing what we do and what we are. And Bitcoin has this interesting property that it's the only record keeping system. And again, this is just one blind guy touching the elephant here. I'm just going to give you one frame of reference of what Bitcoin is. It's the only record keeping system, what you could say is literally a historical record of transactions. It's a ledger of transactions between Bitcoin users. And it's the only historical record that is unalterable. It cannot be amended or changed or censored or reversed or obfuscated. Like it's an unalterable historical record. So it is the most truthful thing human beings have ever created in terms of an actual technological product. And because it's unalterable, it's as incontrovertible or inarguable as the axiom of action itself, right? Like, you can argue till you're blue in the face that Bitcoin was not sent from wallet A to wallet B. You can build all the graphs you want. You can print money and fund fake science and just propagandize and say everything you want about this Bitcoin transaction not being true. But at the end of the day, it's on that blockchain and it's permanently emblazoned in this energy. What's like they use the fly in amber as the metaphor. It's like the deeper it is in the chain, the harder it is to change. So that once it's a few confirmations back, it's basically permanent.
Mhm.
And so we have created this truth machine of sorts. And at the beginning of this, I said no one owns the truth. You shouldn't say like my truth, your truth is the paradox here is that, well, no one owns Bitcoin, but the individual that owns a specific set of Bitcoin, like no one owns the Bitcoin network. It's like almost a public utility.
Mhm.
But the Bitcoin that you do own is the most ownable thing in the world. Like, it's the asset that is most difficult to separate from its owner in human history because it's pure information, basically. And so you have this weird, again, Bitcoin kind of breaking our language or breaking our conceptual structures. It's this global public utility that facilitates the transaction of perfect private property. And so it's this very truthful record keeping system that none of us can own. None of us can change that history or manipulate it, but it allows us to own something that no one can steal from us,
Mm.
which makes it such a game changer. So, anyways, I didn't mean to go off such a philosophical,
It's all good.
but when you
Yeah.
bring up topics like truth and Bitcoin, I mean, the rabbit hole runs deep.
Yeah, I get it, and I really love that you're so thorough. And one of the things that appeals to me about you is like you've named your podcast, for example, "What is money?" instead of like how to make money, right? Or
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
how to get rich off Bitcoin. You've said you can tell that your fascination with words and meaning and languaging is so important, and also breaking it down to the degree of which where you can still steer yourself towards, and we're going to use that word truth again, but a common
Mhm.
path. And so
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. I think some of the
Thank you.
challenges that I have, because this is a new path for me, because I can see your vision, and I can see that the goal in which you're aiming for, the target that you're trying to aim for, I can see it, and I can understand that there are many paths that you can get to, and that may be different from you or for me, but the common goal will be the same. And our structures and things like that at the moment, in terms of the way that we live life, or the way that life has been engineered to the degree that this is the system that we're in, is largely broken.
Hmm.
So I guess the challenge that I have with a digital technology is that, much like what we've seen in the last couple of years, Robert, like, the internet can be changed. I mean, there are things that are being omitted from the internet now on a daily basis, which you could go and search 2 months ago, and it's not
Yeah.
there anymore. 2 years ago, the information has been curated to the degree that we're
Yeah.
only seeing what they want us to see. And when I say they, like, that
Yeah.
whoever's pulling the strings is kind
The
of going,
censors.
yeah, I'm manipulating content. You look at, like, in your world at the moment with the presidential election. I mean, there's
Yeah.
so many things that are skewed towards one bias and another, right? So is
Yes.
there not a possibility that, in terms of digital currency, that something that has been created by man, as is programmable, can be programmed or manipulated or coerced in a certain direction that could be nefarious? It could be used in another way that could be detrimental to my own life and lifestyle, or well-being, or health, or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess one thing to say, this is another framing of Bitcoin, and we're so early in this particular process that it's very theoretical. But there are many Bitcoin maximalists, which are people that think only Bitcoin matters, right? In terms of crypto assets. So a Bitcoin maximalist is someone who would say that all non-Bitcoin crypto assets are shit coins.
Mhm.
And the essential argument behind that is that none of them are decentralized. Only Bitcoin is truly decentralized, meaning that no one individual or company or organization can control it, right? It's something that is very impartial, almost as impartial as the laws of physics, for instance, right? We all abide by the laws of physics. We don't have political election cycles every 4 years to decide the speed of light and the gravitational constant. And, they just are rules that are encoded into the universe. No one can change them. So we all just play by them, right? It's like not even worth talking about because we don't know how to change them. Um, Bitcoin is similar, right? It has certain rules. It actually imports its integrity from the laws of physics through proof of work energy expenditure. That's kind of a deep dive in and of itself, but basically through the proof of work mechanism, which is something that was invented prior to Bitcoin as an anti-spam technology, we're able to create this unalterable record keeping system and this unalterable set of rules, network governance rules or consensus rules. And there are many among the Bitcoin maximalists who believe that Bitcoin will actually allow us to bring the internet to completion. So, one of the main problems we have with the internet today, which is what you just highlighted, is all of the censorship, right? Things can appear online, they can be taken down, social media accounts, especially in a post pandemic world. We've seen rampant social media censorship, which also induces self censorship, right? People get scared. I
Yes.
don't want my Twitter profile getting taken down, so I'm going to shut up, stuff like this. You also see massive manipulation, right? That nation states or other, nefarious non-governmental organizations, elites, powers that be, whatever you want to call them, they'll just create fake accounts, they'll create fake internet traffic, They'll distort voting, they'll distort opinion polls. And by the way, I would say at the bottom of a lot of this is the central bank. It's the money printing. Because if you can just print money that other people are forced to work for, well, then you're able to steal anything that money can buy, right? Including narrative and influence and propaganda and news and media and all these things. So, the fact that the mainstream media has become so unreliable, like almost to the point of being satire, I think that's deeply rooted in the money printer, because you're talking about a central bank, or the interest around the central bank can literally manufacture consent, right? They can print money and buy media and tell media organizations and news anchors and journalists what to say. There's the old saying, right? You can't tell people what to think, but you can tell people what to think about.
Mhm.
So you can make certain aspects of the news cycle salient and de-emphasize other aspects to support whatever the agenda may be, right? Again, the agenda, I don't mean to sound like there's this James Bond-esque room full of guys smoking cigars plotting the end of the world. It's not necessarily like that. I think the world is much more complex. There are centers of power all competing with one another, and they're constantly waging psychological operations against one another and against their populations. But the point I was trying to get to is that the printing of money exacerbates all of that, right? It really is probably the most powerful tool for social engineering known to man. And so what's happening right now, and again, we're in the middle of the storm. So, like, take it all with a grain of salt. I'm just one guy that's with opinions. I'm sure there's a million other aspects to this that I know nothing about, but it seems to me like we're living through the shift of a media paradigm, right? That the technological landscape for communications technology has changed so quickly that the institutions that were accustomed to more or less, adequately socially engineering the world through the control of top-down media, broadcast media, basically.
Mhm.
I always joke about this. When I was growing up, my mom, who was born in 1964, and God rest her soul, she passed away this year. She said when
Sorry to hear.
she was growing up, they had channels 3, 9, and 12. And if the president was on, you're fucked, basically, because, he's like on every channel.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we don't live in that world anymore, right? The internet's the opposite of that world. We've gone from, one to many media distribution model to many to many, right? There's all these channels. It's a torrent, right? It's an absolute information torrent on the internet, to the point where the challenge now is, how do you get signal from noise? How do
Mm.
you discern what's true or valuable or reliable from what's not? And so I think that technological landscape has shifted so quickly that we're now seeing the antiquated institutions that were accustomed to more traditional control mechanisms struggling and striving to catch up, right? They're trying to now get a hold of social media. And that's why you've seen censorship ramp up. That's why you've seen the pandemic be used as an excuse to create, what do they call the thing in the US, right? The Ministry of Truth or whatever, like very 1984 Orwellian nightmare bullshit. You
Oh
couldn't
yeah.
even believe it 10 years ago. And now it's like, it's really, really hard to believe. So, to take this back to Bitcoin and the internet, there again, this cohort of Bitcoin maximalists that believe by facilitating internet communications through Bitcoin, that you can actually uh, gain or import the immutability and the unstoppability and the irreversibility of Bitcoin into communication protocols. So one of the amazing things about Bitcoin is that Well, first of all, these are the two things that make it like incorruptible or very solid. One is it's a fixed supply asset. So it has a total supply of 21 million that will never change. Again, the reasons behind that are a bit more complex. We could go into proof of work mining, social consensus, etc. I would encourage people to read the book The Bitcoin Standard by Saifuddin Ammous. First two-thirds of the book are just an introduction to monetary history. Last third of the book explains why Bitcoin is such a profound innovation in terms of money. And then the second part of Bitcoin that makes it what I would call incorruptible. So one is an unchangeable money supply, and two is unstoppable and irreversible transactions. It cannot be censored, right? It's an uncensorable network, both in the present and in the past, right? You can't alter the historical record of transactions, nor can you stop current transactions. In those transactions, which are monetary, they have monetary value, right? You can write information into those transactions. So the theory is that we can re-architect the internet on Bitcoin and create an unstoppable freedom of speech network, like the internet 2.0, or a lot of people call it Web 5. That's what the current name is in Bitcoin, is this decentralized Bitcoin-based internet that no one can stop, including governments or anyone else. And so that would be the hopeful vision. I'm sorry that I didn't answer your question perfectly, which is like, how can we fully trust this thing? That's a
Yeah.
very deep and nuanced question, but I hope I'm giving you kind of the broad strokes of what Bitcoin's much more than money, you might say. I mean, it depends how you define money, which is obviously one of my favorite things to do, is try to define it. But there's this great hope for it actually completing the internet philosophically, right? When the internet first emerged, people were very excited. This is going to democratize everything. Now everyone has a voice. You can create communication networks and websites and things without permission. It's a peer-to-peer free market dynamic. And that was true to some extent, but we've seen a lot of consolidation at the application layer, right? We have these data monopolies like Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, et cetera, right? These have been tremendously valuable companies, but they've accumulated so much, well, information, which is basically translatable to political power,
Yeah.
that they've become arms of the US government, right? Google and Facebook, they work for the fucking central government at this point, and that's just how it is. So, what's the antidote to all of that? An actual internet that cannot be censored, corrupted, nor stopped by anyone, period, right? We get a communications layer that has the integrity and immutability of the laws of physics themselves.
Mm.
And so we're not there yet, but there is a lot of strong argument that we are headed that direction with Bitcoin.
Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I think the sentiment here, like, would be similar, I think, in the States as it is in Australia. There's this sort of community of free thinkers and people that want to kind of break away and have less government involvement and more autonomy and all those sorts of things, are kind of
Yeah.
saying we need to keep cash, we need to
Yes.
stay away from CBDCs and all these sorts of things. However, I watched both speeches from Robert Kennedy Jr. and from Donald Trump at the Bitcoin conference. They were markedly different in terms of their types of their style and their content, but the tone was the same, was that
Yeah.
there was a government applaud or in a in again embodiment of Bitcoin and digital currency. And so it seems like the writing is on the wall, and we need to embrace this new technology. And I think that the confusion does lie in, like, you when you don't know enough information, you tend to respond in a way that is kind of like, I'm just going to opt out because I don't know enough. And it's that sort of buyer beware type of thing.
Yes.
So I think we can go down many rabbit holes or many tangents in terms of energy and all those sorts of things, which may have an influence, or maybe governmental control, which could potentially put a spanner in the works. But what I like about you and about your philosophies in your teaching is, and I feel like there is an uprising of people that just want to have less government control and more autonomy. And if we can collectively band together, utilizing something like Bitcoin to enable everyone to have that kind of, we're sort of leveling the playing field, so to speak. We're not having these technocracies and these larger companies which own 80% of all the big business in the world, the BlackRocks and the Vanguards and the State Streets and all that kind of stuff. For too long, we've kind of just been swallowed up into this, society of like, there's a limitation on my success. All right, there's a ceiling, and I think what Bitcoin and digital currency offers, or cryptocurrency offers, is unlimited. It's a endless ceiling, that never stops, and that to me is fucking like so desirable and something that I'm drawn towards in many ways. So, I get all of that side of things.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. Yeah, the limitations of what Bitcoin, it's so interesting. It's like the limit is almost human ingenuity itself, because we're just maximizing human freedom with something like Bitcoin, right? You're just making it such that, and it's paradoxical again. It's paradoxical. There's this extreme form of self-constraint that's sort of engineered into Bitcoin, right? That it's a very strong form of private property. So it makes stealing an unprofitable activity, right? It's just not worth your time. You can't, and you can think about this at any level, right? If you custody Bitcoin properly, you can't physically take it from someone, because say they've stored it in what's called a multi-key solution. So they've chopped the information into multiple pieces and distributed it geographically. So the password, which is the private key, is now chopped into 5 pieces and it's in 5 different cities. And you could even, torture this guy and you're not going to get his Bitcoin. You could also think about this at the geopolitical scale, right? If at some point a nation state is holding reserves in Bitcoin, they get invaded by another country. Well, that country just spent a lot of money invading them, but it didn't get anything at the end, right? There was no profit. You're taking the profit motive out of war, out of violence, out of coercion, and you're putting more of a profit motive into entrepreneurship. And so the implications of that on how humans socially organize themselves are simply mind blowing, right? We don't really know how big of a deal this thing is. And, I wrote an essay years ago titled "The Number Zero and Bitcoin." And I was looking for a good answer to the question, what makes Bitcoin different than all these shit coins? Like, what was a historical example of something that emerged that was such a good idea that it just outcompeted every other idea in the world and became globally dominant? And the track that I stumbled upon was the discovery of the number zero, actually. It's a 40-minute essay, so I won't go into all the details, but basically the number zero came out of the East, right? It's not something we had in Roman numerals. It was resisted, actually, ideologically. It was even made illegal at one point.
Wow.
But because the number zero it was called the Hindu Arabic numeral system that had the number zero in it. And by incorporating a zero, you could make calculations basically faster, less prone to error, and in less page space, right? So you could do the same calculations much more economically. Well, guess what? The merchants that adopted a Hindu Arabic numeral system outcompeted those that did not. And what happened? The idea spread across the world, right? It couldn't be stopped, right? Even the Roman Empire was trying to go against it. All these things, the medieval church didn't like it because it contradicted their worldview that they were sharing with people, that there was no void, there's no infinity, but zero implied infinity. And anyways, it's all in the essay. But because the idea was so useful for individuals conducting business, that it could not be stopped and it took over the world, and we all take for granted today the number zero. And the number zero also enabled the invention of calculus. And calculus is integral to every and there are no exceptions to this. There's not a single form of modern science that does not depend on calculus. And you cannot have calculus without a zero-based numeral system. So we literally went from the dark ages basically to where we are today because of this unstoppable idea, just this little idea that's very useful for individuals, very economical for individuals, merchants initially, and then eventually everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think Bitcoin is something similar, right? It just serves the interest of the individual. It maximally protects your purchasing power from being plundered by anyone else. One of the ways I have tried to frame this on Twitter is that the Bitcoin network is the perpetual projection of physical power to protect your purchasing power from plundering by political power. And so there's a lot packed into that, but basically you're mining Bitcoin. So there's constantly energy being coursing through the network to preserve the network integrity. That's what gives it purchasing power or monetary value. And that's what makes it hard to steal because it's like digital, to use the sailor metaphor, it's digital energy or it's digital power, right? It's power made into a digital form. And so it maximally serves the individual's interest. And this is why no one will be able to stop it, right? It's not a push, it's a pull. Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
It's not being forced on anyone, but it's so useful to everyone that everyone wants it. So they're going to give me some of that, right? Especially the more governments are printing money, the more they're stealing purchasing power from savers through inflation, the more people are going to pull Bitcoin, the more they're going to want it. And so this is the great promise of Bitcoin, and this is the path by which I think it ultimately does usher in that bright orange future.
I love it. Robert, we could go on forever. I really appreciate your time, man. You're such a great guy. Where can people go to find out more about you, learn about your podcasts, your philosophies, your teachings, Bitcoin naturally, and even your men's retreats and all those sorts of things?
Yeah, thank you again so much for having me. This has been a lot of fun. Always like talking Bitcoin. Yeah, so podcast website is whatismoneypodcast.com. My biggest social media platform is X. My handle is at Breedlove22, BREEDLOVE 22. If you search my name on YouTube, should come up, Robert Breedlove. And then I'm also on Instagram. If you're in, that's where we do more of the lifestyle, men's retreat, working out, that kind of stuff. That's Breedlove _22. So BREEDLOVE _22 on Instagram.
Awesome. Mate, thanks again. I really appreciate you. I definitely would encourage anyone listening to this to go and follow you on all your platforms and have a listen to your podcast at least. I think it's a wealth of information, but I think what I love about your style is that you are very humble and you're kind of just showing your journey for what it is. And I know you said at the outset of this that you're more of an introvert, but I think you maybe teeter on both sides. I think there's a certain part of you that's an extrovert, and then you need some time to replenish and recover and go solo for a little bit. So again, we've got some synergies going on there. So anyway, I appreciate you, man. You're a great guy once again. I hope we can circle back one time in the future and go a little bit deeper down this rabbit hole. It's been an amazing chat.
I'd love to do that, and you're absolutely correct. The term I've heard used is ambivert because they scored on a gradient, and I'm usually barely an introvert, and it does feel that way. Yeah, I can be long-winded, but I like a lot of solitude.
Yeah, I hear you. All right, man. Until we meet again, I'll talk to you soon.
All right, man. Thank you so much.
Take care.